Director of the Broward County Natural Resources Planning and Management Division. The reason that we have Jennifer here today is because as we were thinking about ways to better collaborate for TOD, we knew that she was involved with the Regional Climate Compact. And when we were discussing this with her, we were struck by the number of similarities between planning for climate change and planning for TOD. And so we decided to invite her here today to talk about her role in helping to foster regional collaboration and maybe some of the similarities that she sees. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Looking at the room, I think that there are a number of individuals who could probably participate in delivering the presentation if they were asked. So I hope you'll tolerate another review. But I do appreciate the opportunity to share, and I hope you don't mind my turning this around, but that way I can look at everyone and still have a screen to look at myself. But you know, the opportunity to share our experience in working regionally on issues of climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. The presentation that I'll make today is very similar to one that I made on the West Coast in Florida a couple of months ago, as you know, many communities are kind of seeing opportunities to be more effective in advancing issues of local importance through regional partnerships. And so we actually provide a lot of support both within the state and outside in trying to share the compact model and help communities understand whether or not there might be some elements here that would be useful in their own efforts. And I think the only other thing I'd say before I get started is even today we had several meetings that were really progressive in terms of how we're bringing new partners and elevating conversations with individuals and stakeholders that we've struggled for years. And so there's this constant delivery, I think, that the compact has provided for us that always makes us feel very appreciative and grateful to have regional colleagues that we can collaborate so closely with. So it looks like it's going to want me to put the, doesn't want to progress. I need to reinsert the presentation. Oh, how odd. Okay, so I don't need to, well, I don't really know who's on the phone, so, and I wasn't really sure who was going to be in the audience. So in terms of describing Southeast Florida, I know I don't need to spend much time with this for anyone here in the room, but just recognizing that prior to working regionally, most of our individual counties who are partners in the compact, which include Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe, were collectively interested in working towards issues of climate mitigation and adaptation. But there came a point of realization where we understood that coming together and trying to move initiatives would be much more significant if we were able to wield the weight of the region in that conversation. And so instead of talking about, you know, the 1.8 million people in Broward County at the time, we could talk about the nearly 6 million people in the region, or the fact that Southeast Florida accounts for 1/3 of not just the state's population, but the gross domestic product. And so our successes in this area would ultimately have great consequence, not just for our region, but for the entire state, and be able to use those sorts of talk points in elevating our message. And then there were a number of things that that we shared in the region that also made it logical that we might want to work together. We share a kind of typical common landscape of dense coastal development, which creates certain challenges. We're flat, low-lying. We're all dealing with similar vulnerabilities, and we're interconnected and connected to one another in a number of areas, including our natural resources of our coral reefs or the Everglades or our watersheds. And those would ultimately be, they are resources that are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and they're also resources that could be inadvertently damaged if we chose adaptation strategies that weren't sensitive to the needs of our neighbors. And that's particularly true if we look at issues of like beach management. And so we were mutually invested in one another. And so this kind of highlights once again some of the natural systems things, but then there were also lots of areas of infrastructure where we were interconnected, whether we're talking about our roads, or the fact that Some people live in one community and they work in another. So resilience isn't born out of just one community being resilient, but it really needs to be the region, because vulnerabilities in one area do cascade and impact our neighbors. And then our economies are ultimately very connected as well. And we probably know this already, when development declines, it's not just happening in one county, it's happening regionally. When we're in the way of growth and economic activity, generally it's, the entire region, and very small distinctions from north to south. But even though we kind of intuitively knew all of these things, and we were all working in a very organized manner within our respective counties and with our own task forces, none of that activity was being coordinated. We had a realization that our neighbors were working on these issues, and in some cases we were even relying upon the same individuals to support our individual efforts. So we might have a climate change task force or a sea level rise task force, and the same member in the community was being tapped to serve this role, kind of in a redundant manner up and down the coast. But even with all of that, we still had different sea level rise projections, even though many of the same people supporting a work group designed to develop a local sea level rise projection were supporting all those efforts. The projections themselves ended up being distinct, and maybe that's because there was some decision making that went into the process that wasn't uniform. So what transpired was, and another example of the inconsistencies or the vulnerability maps, and we had everyone utilizing GIS to develop these, but they looked very different. It made it hard to tell a coordinated story or deliver a single story. And this all became very evident when our elected leadership was up in Washington, D.C., and they were collectively kind of trying to influence what we hoped to be significant energy policy at the time. And we're hoping that adaptation would not be lost in that conversation. And it became very evident to them that they were meeting with congressional members and sharing all these tools, that it was kind of silly to have neighbors who were all racing in with their independent work product, trying to tell the same story, but spending more time explaining the distinctions rather than delivering the message. And so that led to a decision up in Washington, D.C. by the elected officials who were there at the time, and the staff that was accompanying them was provided the directive that we would return home, and in a 3-month time frame we would deliver a regional summit where we would have a regional conversation about climate change, its impact, how we are mutually invested in what happens next, that we would have a conversation about the nature of the challenges and where we stood to gain be more successful as a region by working together. So Broward County actually hosted that first summit, and the way that got organized, and the decision had been made in D.C. that we would be doing that. So we had our marching orders. But one of the women that I worked with at the time was very engaged in policy and had been in her entire career. And she reached out to who were the legislative coordinators in the neighboring counties and said, we need to pull this together. I need you to be a partner. And they had standing relationships that she could call upon, and they brought in the right people. And they might not have been the right people, but it really was about utilizing the relationships that we had to find the right people and who needed to be there for this type of conversation. And some of the staff were there already. As we were preparing for the summit, we also knew too, though, that it was really going to be important to have something tangible and material at the end. It couldn't just be enough to say that we all got together and then you walk away at the end and think, oh, that was a great conversation. So we were working in tandem to develop what we coined at the time the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. I will admit that we had the benefit of a friend who had been very experienced in state government, who was a wonderful resource, who helped us as we were kind of talking about what this agreement needed to do for ourselves. We didn't want it to be too binding, but it had to have structure. It needed to be respectful of regional distinctions, but it needed to provide some direction, that kind of thing. And what would the principal elements be? So that was all developed in advance, and then we were able to come to the summit and have a conversation, and then the deliverable at the end of sort of a press conference was this compact that our 4 elected officials, the same 4 who had been, I think all 4, but maybe one other who hadn't been there but was on board the entire time, that they all stood on stage and committed to supporting this compact and bringing it back to their respective commissions for endorsement. And so that summit was held in October, and I believe by December, all 4 of the county commissions had uniformly adopted this agreement. And so that was fairly significant. It committed the 4 counties to work voluntarily on state and federal policy in the areas of energy and climate. It committed to our baselining our planning tools, specifically that we would develop a unified sea level rise projection, that we would develop a unified method for mapping vulnerability and conducting risk assessments, that we would also develop a regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory to help guide our emissions reduction strategies, and that we would assign the necessary staff within the available resources to do that. That we would also complete a regional action plan, and that we would commit to reconvening in a very similar manner these annual summits so that we could track our progress and kind of reassess priorities and figure out what we needed to do next. So that was all in 2009, and I can share that that has been the practice. We have accomplished all of those things. We have advanced the Compact 2.0 document, which was a kind of updated and renewed commitment. We've had many, many work products come before our respective commissions, and I'll talk a little bit more about now, all the structure and some of the other, activities that have been the process of coordinating regionally. So those are the commitments as I indicated. One of the things that I want to share is that even though I'm going to focus a bit on the staff structure, that we have to admit that in large part what we hoped to achieve by working regionally was that we would be able to attract resources that were maybe difficult to secure when the needs were so broad and so diverse. So if you have 4 counties or 110 cities that are all asking for the same support from, say, the South Florida Water Management District, how do they, with their limited staff, invest at the level that's necessary across all those communities? So we wanted to position ourselves where partners could justify investing in us because it would be so recognized by making that investment that the benefits would be so rich, that they would be broad, that it would be transferable, that it would be far-reaching. And for where there are limited staff resources, if you have to pick and choose. So we wanted the region to be selected. We also knew that we needed much in the way of external expertise to help us. One of the reasons that, one of the benefits of coordinating regionally, and especially I'll note in the area of transportation, was the recognition that we didn't all have the same expertise. Some of us had water experts on staff, some of us had energy experts, some had transportation experts, but none of us were all of those things. And so the beauty of coming together regionally is that Palm Beach had great business partners, and they were really good on natural resources issues. And in Broward County, we had good water and policy expertise, and Miami-Dade had great transportation expertise, and the Keys had been very progressive also on their environmental initiatives. And so immediately we were able to share the expertise of all of those staff, but then look at all these partner agencies that would be able to help fill in where our own expertise was lacking. So the structure of the staff steering committee. So we have the compact, which is the county's just saying that we're generally going to work together, but operationally, how did we proceed? We ended up having an action item from each of the commissions that would designate 2 staff people to serve on a staff steering committee. So each one of the 4 counties had 2 staff individuals, and then we added ad hoc members, which were the South Florida Water Management District, because we knew we couldn't be having this conversation without having the representation. Water too fundamental to being, water management too fundamental to the solutions and strategies. We invited the Regional Planning Council because they were South Florida Regional Planning Council representing 3 of the 4 counties and were organized and ready to provide support. And we wanted to make sure that we had strong environmental participation, and so we asked to make sure in each of these areas we also already had good partners. We had, kind of friends who were already friendly and familiar with the climate activities of the region, and so they were able to really readily step in. In the next year, we ended up adding municipal participants. We didn't have municipal participation initially, and that participation it evolved kind of differently across the 4 counties. And I can get into it if it ends up being important. Initially, we had 1 municipality per county that was represented on the staff steering committee along with these ad hoc members. The staff steering committee would meet on a monthly basis at minimum, but in the end, when we were taking up many of these initiatives, there were much more frequent meetings and conversations taking place. But even today, we've evolved a bit where we have staff steering committee meetings that are teleconferences every 2 weeks. I had one today on the way in here. We also have staff retreats where we get together on about a quarterly basis where we can work out our work plans and agendas for the year. And we have annual summits, and we have a lot of other workshops happening throughout the year. But the point being that we're very connected to one another, and outside of these meetings, we're generally communicating with other agency staff like they're our own. I mean, that's how regularly engaged we are with one another. We had a series of initial work products that were developed in the first year. These would set the foundation for the development of the Regional Climate Action Plan. So we did produce the Unified Sea Level Rise Projection. We did all the GIS teams across the 4 counties all worked with support from NOAA, support from the South Florida Water Management District. We developed a regional digital elevation model, did all of that work, presented the analyses. We developed a regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and all of those work products we were able to come back and share with our commissions demonstrating progress. I don't think I need to go through these too much, but just to acknowledge we did move from what was that kind of very disparate set of projections, different time frames, different ranges, to a single projection. But we also acknowledged that as we were working and moving forward, that any of these work products weren't intended to be the end product. That there was, and this was important for us on climate change issues because there's a constant evolution of science, and we wanted to be able to bring that back into the process. And it was important that when we were working on these exercises that we were able to demonstrate that these are really robust, these are all the experts that were involved in the process, and we were able to not only adopt the first projection, but we were able to bring them back with strong endorsement rather than, well, I don't understand why it's changed, or, it seems peculiar to me that, that this would be altered in a couple of years. We had experts there with us. So it was never just like a staff recommendation, but it was reflective of the most knowledgeable, the input and the recommendations of the most knowledgeable individuals in the region. And there's been a lot of credibility to our work products by taking that approach. We also developed the Regional Climate Action Plan. This was another year-long process. We developed a bunch of work groups, which reached out broadly across the 4 areas, had in-person meetings, experts that were both public and private, and community members. After developing the work plan, we went through a public process that was, the whole process was public, but then it was posted online, received more comments, went through refinements, and then it took us another year to adopt recommendations. And one of the things that I would say about that is that there might have been some who would have maybe grown aggravated with the amount of time that it was taking. But we were all very respectful of the fact that even though we're working as a region, we all have different government structures. We all have different relationships within the community. And we needed not only to complete a work product, but we needed to have a work product that would be endorsed and would be advanced. And so building support for that work product in the process was important. And so if one of the communities felt like, well, I'm not sure that all the municipalities are going to be on board, and we need, municipal engagement, and I need to spend some time working with the municipalities in order to get there, then that's what it took. And so it actually took one of our partners in the compact a full year to complete the vetting that they needed to, but when they did, it came forward with a lot of celebration. And we've been very sensitive again that we need to understand that we don't all mirror one another, and we all came forward with different resources, different levels of support, different levels of knowledge about the subject. And that's an important thing to note too, that when we developed the initial work product, the sea level rise projection, the mapping, some of the communities were going to need more support up front than some of the others. You know, Broward County had worked for years developing really advanced hydrologic models. Not all the communities had that. So there was a recognition that when we came forward, or if expertise was going to be invested in the region, sometimes that expertise might have to be directed to, you know, like a single partner who needed that support more than another. And it was important that we tried to elevate to a common baseline. And we just recognized that those would be, you wouldn't always have equivalent benefits at all times, but the important thing was that the region was gaining advantage. After completing the regional action plan, and subsequently during the next 3 years, so the work plan was formally adopted in 2012. Through 2015, we were hosting implementation workshops, so we can have these aggressive recommendations, but how do they get implemented, or what do you do with the tools? So for example, we had focused workshops with the engineering community and the municipalities and planners on, once you've adopted the sea level rise projection, how does that actually get applied in planning? Or how do we integrate stormwater management under future conditions more effectively in our comp plan processes? Or how can we develop model, what does model comp plan language look like, so that not all of our partners would have to go through the exercise of writing that all, so we could develop templates that could be readily adopted or employed by partners in the community. So it was about trying to facilitate participation, especially where not all of the communities had the same resources. So these are just some examples. One of the other things that we have been able to undertake as a region is the hosting of student redesign workshops. And here we have felt that we struggle as a community to understand adaptation options because we have a hard time understanding what they'll look like, or how could the landscape change. And so in the first year, we were able to take advantage of Dutch expertise, and they were the same individuals who had been involved with the Dutch dialogue following Hurricane Katrina, and Rebuild by Design following Hurricane Sandy, and begin to contemplate how would we integrate resilient redesign principles in our development and redevelopment processes. What was significant in that exercise is we brought together landscape architects, transportation planners, water managers, emergency management professionals, natural parks or natural resource managers, a whole host of people who normally didn't work alongside one another to participate in these activities. We hosted this, we've done it now for 3 different years, selecting model sites that are kind of represented in all of our communities so that the results are transferable. We've been able to establish an incredible partnership with the academic community that's helped bring expertise to that assignment. And in the end, we've had individuals say, I just can't believe that you could accomplish that much in 3 days. Imagine what, and this was without any money. So Rebuild by Design has been supported by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And it's not the same scale, but similarly beneficial in our own region. We have been able to extend the compact model to a number of other focal areas. We convened a shoreline resilience work group to help bring focused attention on the shoreline issues like living shorelines, beach management, coral reef conservation and management. Again, just areas that we needed to collaborate more closely. It's allowed us to develop some significant goals that we've been able to have adopted at our commission level. Once again, because we're able to speak about, the neighbors having similar goals, and that ends up making some of those more difficult decisions more tenable when they're being shared. One of the things that has also transpired in this process is we were able to garner significant grant funding. When we commenced, we didn't have any dedicated resources. This is actually occurring during the time of the economic recession. We benefited from the same Sustainable Communities program that the previous speaker referred to, and received some funding for a couple of years. Then we received some grant funding from Kresge. But this last year, all of our counties for the first time dedicated, committed, and recurring resources to providing dedicated staffing for the compact. That was about 8 years into the process, but it finally did occur, and in large part because we were able to point to so many successes and advancements, including not just the county's participation in, say, adopting the sea level rise projection, but more than half of our cities have. Or, for example, all 4 of the counties having implemented climate change resiliency into their comprehensive plans. All 4 counties did that in just a year's time. Advancements that would normally take much longer if we were working independently, but we share so much in the way of resources and models that there have been a number of efficiencies that have been gained. We've also been able to garner a sizable amount of external support in both expertise and cost share funding on projects. We have a project currently with the Army Corps of Engineers that's designed to help us set regional standards for resiliency. EPA supported a resilient design initiative. RAND has been helping us with land use scenarios in light of climate change, looking at both water management, water supply, and economics. And we currently have a really impressive project with Delterra looking at cascading impacts of flood risk under future sea level rise conditions focused on critical infrastructure. And these are really some of the most cutting edge innovative tools that, again, we're able to attract because of the regional benefits that are derived by their investing these resources and time. So I talked about the budgeted compact support. I said earlier that we've continued to host these annual summits. When we held the first climate summit, the attendance was on the order of 300. The last summit held in Key West, the attendance was over 600. And each year we have elected officials or city managers or business leaders who will say, I had no idea. I didn't know that the compact exists. I didn't know about these tools. I didn't know about the resources. And so no matter how much we think we're sharing or how much we think that we're being inclusive or celebrating or communicating, it is just astonishing how significant the need is, the communications challenge, and how many of us need to be involved in that, and the importance of having these regional convenings where people can get exposed to things that they wouldn't otherwise. We take for granted and assume that everybody has the same level of, or maybe it's liberty or free time to be able to research it, but of course we're living and breathing in it, and this, for many, is their only opportunity to really have that exposure. We have also really just this last year been able to expand our partnerships and include individuals and sectors that we had a really difficult time engaging with, and some of these sectors are they're very esoteric and we can't speak their language, and so we needed people who were kind of on the inside who could help us communicate better. And how effective that has been. We had a very meaningful event earlier this year that included all of our county administrators, our budget analysts, our risk managers from across the 4 counties, financial advisors for the 4 counties. We had real estate professionals, mortgage lenders who were all part of this conversation about economic resilience and why all of these sectors are invested in what happens next and how this is a South Florida priority. We had a meeting this morning with the business sector where we've been trying to establish relationships for years, but they're actually having a lot in the way of climate resilience conversation, and yet we weren't working together. It's taken that long for some of the partnerships, but we're making steady progress. We have also established a formal partnership with the Florida Climate Institute. This happened about 2 to 3 years ago. And this is where we recognized other regions had the advantage of really sustained research engagement focused on climate change with local partners, and we just didn't have it at all. And yet we have all these really great institutions in Florida. It's about what's going on that, we have all these partnerships with institutions outside of the state, but we're not engaging, well internally. So we were able to work through that. We now established a Southeast Florida hub that's focused on bringing design expertise and economic expertise and hydrologic expertise and research project focused on projects that we care about and where we need those investments. And we hear also monthly phone calls, and we just had a retreat with our FCI partners just 2 weeks ago, and they're also involved in our update to the Climate Action Plan. So the Compact Staff Steering Committee over the years has evolved. We have developed a process now where we have rotating municipal membership. We have developed a series of additional subgroups that you can kind of see here. We have partners and friends that include faith-based groups and, you know, again, the business sector, others. So it's a much broader network of individuals who, with whom we're regularly engaging today. Duplication slide. I'm not going to share this one. So as I started out at the beginning about the you know, again, in some areas, counties have no relevance, and so they might look at the compact and say, well, you know, it's works well for you, but here counties are non-entities. But we don't have to all have the same governance structure in order for the compact model to have relevance. We were invited to an exchange with the program in South Africa where they were struggling with issues of regional climate resilience, and, you know, one community that's really well resourced and others that are not, but they're interdependent. They ended up adopting a Durban compact that's modeled after the Southeast Florida compact. Norfolk, Virginia has really struggled. We've spent a lot of time working with them. The League of Cities ended up 2 years ago adopting an initiative, the Regional Compacts Initiative, to try to utilize what's been the compact model to help bring regions together across our state, focused on any number of issues. The utilities in South Florida have now, under the kind of the umbrella of the compact, also formed a Resilient Utilities Coalition to help give targeted support to issues relevant to water, wastewater, and stormwater. And we now have a Sustained Coastal Oceans Task Force /Forum, again making tremendous headway, and it looks like there's the promise of some resources coming to that effort and better organized conservation management of our coastal resources with climate resilience in mind. We are now in the process of needing to formally update our original Regional Climate Action Plan. We just kicked off the process this month, and we're intending to bring forward an updated document in December when Broward County hosts the next summit. And we'll be including new focal areas. We're wanting to become more action-oriented. I've talked about some of the sectors. Others include disadvantaged communities, public health, that need to be better addressed in our compact document. We know that. And there's some other, you know, priorities that will be coming through that process. So just kind of wrapping things up, some of the things that I think we collectively recognize is that by working regionally, we have garnered a great deal of support. We've been provided an opportunity to sit at the table. We had representation in the President Obama's climate task force for local governments, regions, and tribal entities focused on climate resilience and preparedness. We have advanced planning in this area at, I think, at just monumental speed, and it is because we work so closely. We share information, we share models. Broward County worked 5 years on property assessed clean energy. When we finally adopted that, neighboring counties were able to take the same action in 2 weeks because we'd worked through the documents. We had the contracts, the attorneys were talking to each other the entire time. We need to wait for the next county to spend 5 years on that process too. Great leveraging of resources and expertise. What would I say about some of the guidance? I said up front that we had the benefit of kind of a friend who was very experienced in policy, particularly at the state level. He then went on to work for not-for-profits, and we have gained great advantage by having somebody who isn't one of the counties, who isn't one of the direct stakeholders, facilitate the process. And you know, we don't always see eye to eye, and sometimes we do need to have some private conversations, work through some issues, and having somebody who can serve in that role, I think, helps keep things threaded together. Again, recognizing partner differences and management structure. So, okay, we don't all share the same priorities, but we share the same framework. That's been the idea. Another thing that we've worked through is during our process, sometimes we had a need to revisit the organizational structure. Maybe a key member was leaving, and we didn't have those conversations earlier because it was hard, because everything was working so well, and we didn't want to offend anybody in thinking about the future. But in the end, it's easier to do that up front and have a process that you can fall back on rather than trying to sort it out. during that period of transition. So I think having some of those guidelines established up front is good, and we do have a guidance document that we used in that role. We just had touched on all the issues. We've been criticized from the very beginning about not being sufficiently inclusive. You know, I think that we try, but we also recognize that you need to be able to maintain a group where you can get things done, but you have to be able to provide forums that allow for the type of broad engagement that the community needs and has a right to expect. So communication strategies are always an area of expanded investment, the necessary expanded investment. We still need support there. So I've touched on some of these already. I think I've covered the rest of the bullets there in that slide. But in the end, the compact has been able to persist through dramatic changes in our government. None of the commissioners that signed on to the initial compact, maybe one, is still in office. Boards have transitioned immensely, and yet there's never been any question about staying committed to the compact. I just think that the delivery has been so great that it would never come into question, and our administration and commissioners remain very well versed on the compact itself and its importance. So with that, I'll conclude and see if there's any questions. Thank you. You don't get to ask questions.
Well, you have brought a wealth of information, as you always do, and having worked somewhere else where none of this is happening in Central Florida, it was incredible to move down here and find that there was so much energy and movement around a very important issue, which is a regional issue. And it's climate change, and it's resilience, and it's sea level rise, you know, all put together. One of the things that this group has struggled with is how to galvanize agencies and local governments around a topic that is very local, which is transit-oriented development, but is very regional because it occurs around a regional system, or a series of regional systems that are transportation systems that is mainly transit. And so my question is, how important, because obviously you're not an elected official and you are not a county manager, so you are staff inside. And a lot of times when we read about, how do these processes get organized, there's always a part about leadership, and there's an implication that leadership has to be an elected official, somebody, at a very high level to bring people together. But you've talked about a process where it almost started in one place and then started attracting people around it. If you can go back a little bit into, how did you get it to happen? Is it having, because you mentioned there was somebody with a lot of experience who helped kind of get the process going. So is it having influence within the political realm? What was the role of staff in the process? And then kind of the progression of starting from small and then, growing bigger. If you can just kind of go back over those steps to help us understand how we as staff maybe can get going, something that is of a regional nature as well.
Okay. Well, I hope I remember all the questions. I'll just talk about Broward for a minute, because I want to talk about how Broward became interested in climate change. And it's interesting that the recommendations that we form a climate change task force came from our Water Advisory Board, because our Water Advisory Board understood that when you talk about climate impact, it's about water in Broward County, whether it's water supply, flood management, natural systems, it's all connected by water. Those were elected officials. Staff, though, as you probably know, work very closely to bring initiative to elected officials who can provide leadership So I really think that you do need elected officials who are interested in leading, who care about those issues and are willing to invest their time. Because I think that staff will not get it done on our own. With regard, and here's an example, on Coast Ocean Forum, the reason that forum, well, it was called the task force and then it was the forum, but the reason that task force got created was because there had been a 5-year technical effort focused on developing recommendations for regional coordination on coastal resource issues with all these really great, bright staff people who were involved in our agency and others, and it wouldn't go anywhere. Didn't matter. You could have all the meetings that you wanted, but until there was policy leadership behind the recommendation, you couldn't get it going. And so we looked at the contact and said, how do you bring the contact model specifically to this issue? So we ended up creating a forum that involved, interestingly, 2 elected officials from each of the counties, 3 municipal representatives from each of the counties, and they held meetings and received the full education on all the coastal resource issues, worked to develop a report, and then the report ended up being advanced, and now they're jointly lobbying for resources in the state and look to be doing very well. But it wasn't happening with technical staff alone. I do think that on the transportation issues, transportation has been a great policy and from our leadership for years. I think that the business community is acutely aware that this is one of the regional issues, transportation, resilience, and they will identify another one that will come to me. But I think that in recognizing that there's strong business interest in working to help resolve those issues because it is such a matter of community livability, that there's, in fact, I mean, you have so many political officials engaged around that issue. I know you're talking about transit-oriented development specifically, but just like we have the shoreline resilience work group within the compact, those are a lot of really targeted initiatives that fall under that larger thing. So I think you find the mechanism whereby you enjoy the umbrella support of coordination on the regional issues and a formal interest in ensuring that TOD is part of that solution. So I don't know if it's being overlooked today. I don't know if it's not being well enough coordinated. But I think that you have that conversation and work to ensure that TOD is part of the solution, just as we wanted to ensure that environmental initiatives were part of the solution, or whatever whatever the focal area. Is that helpful at all?
Very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Does anybody on the phone have questions?
Can you ask somebody to mute their phone?
Yes. If you're not talking, could you please mute your phone? That was a request from the audience here. But anybody with questions on the phone?
If I could ask a question. Just for the benefit of the group, I was talking to Sarah before, and working on the transportation side of dealing with the resilience issues. Broward MPO led the 4-county effort just because we offered to lead that effort, not that we were necessarily more qualified than anybody. But the recommendations out of this pilot project look at climate resilience and climate change impacts to the regional transportation network. Those we finished after the completion of our last long-range transportation plan. So now as we're starting the new process, we're looking to incorporate some of the recommendations about addressing climate resilience and other impacts on the transportation network. Those we will incorporate into our long-range plan, looking at how we use that to prioritize projects and move forward. There's a two-pronged strategy. One is to do long-range planning and improvements to fortify the system for the resiliency that's needed, and then also have a better process to deal with short-term emergencies as they come up. A few years ago when A1A got washed out in Fort Lauderdale, we didn't have a good process of knowing how to deal with it, and there may be some things that could have been done differently. And so now we're hoping that we're better able to, you know, hope to anticipate long-term issues to respond better to short-term.
Jennifer, back in November, I was in California, and the New York Times had a front page article on sea level rise in Fort Lauderdale. And I just wondered, sea level rise, climate change, do we use it the same way in similar conversation? How do we compare what's being done with this compact climate change? Is it sea level rise and climate change?
So when you, and it was funny because I received some comments the other day from someone that said, you know, being very loose in the vernacular. So I think we talk about climate change as all inclusive, you know, all of the impacts, you know, heat and, you know, threats to public health and ocean acidification and warming that threatens the reefs and rising seas. So sea level rise being one of the impacts associated, or one of the factors associated with climate impacts in our community, climate change impacts. The action plan addresses both climate mitigation and adaptation issues and deals with a whole host of impacts. But I think we oftentimes find that there is greater conversation about adaptation and the more immediate issues of sea level rise, because it is so it's occurring today. We don't have the luxury. I mean, it's obvious, it's visible, it compels, it's driven the organization of resources, as we've seen in Miami Beach. It's not because they were worried about the impacts in 30 years, they're worried about the flooding that's happening today. And we do use that as the basis for demonstrating the need for organized action, but we are very much trying to stay ahead of those future impacts by speaking about this is what's occurring, this is what's predicted, and this is what we need to plan for. On the emission side, we struggle more because of a number of reasons, including, you know, state energy policy. And we know, though, that development trends in transportation outside of the energy sector is how you address emissions, especially in our community where we don't have large industry. So we are very concerned in compact conversation about development trends in transportation, and dismayed that we don't see, I think that we see a lot of poor decision after poor decision, and we do see some good examples. But one of the things that we're hoping for through the compact process is something more in the way of an actual regional plan. And we've gone through visioning activities like 750 that might speak to high level towards that initiative, but people need to see things that are more tangible. And I think that if we work to better demonstrate how transit-oriented development, as we worked with the MPO and James and his group to bring a lot of the transportation plans to that RAMS process to say, well, what does this look like in the way of meeting a number of objectives? I think we need to employ more of that as part of, you know, the community livability, but really the only thing that we can actually influence short-term in the way of emissions reduction progress. I mean, we can do stuff at the residential level, but I think you know what I mean, is that's a significant 50% of our emissions regionally is transportation. And so if we can address that, we can make good headway towards our goals. I think we need to talk more about that, and we don't.
Jennifer, this is Jessica Dimmick on the phone. As you were talking today and when we spoke earlier, you know, I'm struck by the number of parallels that I see, especially with the circumstances from which the Climate Change Compact arose and our TOD working group, not just for transit-oriented development, but thinking about needing to provide our citizens with viable transportation options beyond the automobile. And one of the things that I noted when you and I spoke was, and I think you touched on this a little bit, was when you were forming the compact, one of the keys you said was that you started with these intrinsic values to why you were doing what you were doing, and that built a foundation that no one could really argue with, and that sort of paved the way for everyone to come together. And I was just wondering if you could maybe elaborate on that aspect just a little bit more.
I'm trying to think about what those were specifically. I don't even remember what I said, the intrinsic values. I mean, that we were they were. I apologize. I don't remember exactly what I was expressing that you're responding to.
Sure. It's more like you said you didn't worry about necessarily how to fund the partnership and recognizing that the partners were all very different, but that this was an issue, climate change was an issue of tremendous proportions, and that all of the counties sort of understood that the need to work together to ensure a great quality of life was needed. And so that kind of bigger picture, values-based conversation was one of the things that garnered everyone to sort of come together.
Yeah, I mean, that in the end, it's about long-term community livability, and if we fail to make
Excuse me, whoever is talking, can you please put your phone on mute?
So if we fail to make certain investments, you will ultimately see erosions in community livability, return on investments that are going to work contrary to your ability to fund the investments that are needed in the first place. Your adaptation strategy is only viable if you can stay ahead of the issues. You can't implement it when things are in a state of erosion. And so I think that there was a recognition that, up front, we can't afford to defer. We don't have that luxury. And on the emissions side, our counties were never, the interesting thing is when Broward County adopted an 80% emissions reduction goal, I might look at that and think, well, I'm not really sure how feasible that is. But they didn't allow the goal to stand in the way of making the commitment. And so today we can always say, we've got these goals. We're directed to work towards meeting those goals. We might not meet the goal because of any number of circumstances, but if you set a low bar, then it doesn't cultivate the big ideas. We had a meeting today that I alluded to, and the discussion was about a regional plan. And ultimately, we need that. We need discrete projects that people need to know what we're investing in. Is it phased investment? What does it look like? How will it be funded? And we actually will need to have funding options. But the big hazard was expressed in terms of allowing an idea like budget be the thing that drives your planning. Don't think about the resources. Figure out what you need and what you can bring to that visioning process, and then figure out what you do next. But don't scale your effort by the magnitude of the future ask or the investment that is going to be needed. We'll have to work through those things with time. There may be more innovative financial tools. There could be more federal participation. There could be any number of things that will ultimately help make some of those solutions more acceptable than they might be today. I mean, we're working on some issues that are going to require, in my mind, a massive organization of funding. But you can't not present the need because you're afraid of the conversation that will ensue. It's better to at least have a plan and something ready when people are looking and they're looking for something to invest in, and we know that that's what it's like with the federal government. So often you have to have something that's construction ready. Well, if you didn't challenge yourself to be responsive under that situation, how will you be competitive for the resources? I do want to say, too, that since we are updating the Regional Climate Action Plan, and there is a sustainable communities and transportation sector. There is a call right now for the transportation people of our community to participate in that process, to support the work group. If you have recommendations that you think that the Regional Climate Action Plan, one, doesn't address, or two, that the action plan could help drive, help push what you would like to see and it fits in there, this is the time to bring those ideas forward, and then you've got something that you can point to that says, look, this was a recommendation that came from this regional process, everybody endorsed, and when we look at implementation today, we feel that 80 to 90% of the recommendations have been, they're being implemented. It's not like there's been inaction. It's not to say they're completely implemented, but they've been advanced. They've garnered resources and support. So those TOD objectives that you have, we need that expertise. We need to know what's lacking and to know what the opportunities are. And if you want to give me your business card, I'll make sure that you're on the, and I've reached out to your group already, Sarah, for points of contact. But we're just getting started, and there is going to be a big meeting on April 27th. That will be a World Cafe style sort of regional last push to garner input as we wrap up that document. So we're taking more time than we wanted.
Great, that's fantastic. Yeah, and we, Jennifer, if you want to send that information to me, we'll be sure to put it into our meeting summary, and I can get it out to the rest of the group, and we can definitely work on getting you some comments for that, and maybe have some people in attendance if you all are interested. So
yeah, through you, if you just want to send, get me on that list, and
yeah.
I can make sure that happens. And my Annie Day is going to be coordinating that effort through the full FC, so you can reach out to her directly too if you prefer.
Great, thank you so much.